welcoming everybody. Our session is being recorded. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Excited to see you here today. When you get your sound hooked up and you're all settled in the Zoom room, please introduce yourself in the chat. That would be very helpful for our professor to know who's here. What made you decide to join today's presentation? Where are you Zooming from? What's your Yale affiliation? We would love to see that. So please do, once you get all set up, introduce yourself in the chat. Nice to have you all here. Hi to Gary. Gary's first to introduce himself. Don't forget, please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're Zooming from. What made you decide to join the presentation today? Hi to Stan from Fairfield. I think our numbers are still climbing a little bit. Hi to Janine Pearson 93, Zooming from LA. All right. Stan's PhD of 63 and Catherine 78 from Boston. Jack 1977. Hi, Leah. Nice to see you here. Leah zooming in from Canada. We're covering the globe here today. So prize to whoever is from the furthest. Hi to Marco Lee, whose parents are from Haiti, Yale Med School class of 98. Hi to Razan, Morse College class of 08. One of the things I love about doing these presentations is how many of you span all different generations of Yaleys, and family and friends are also welcome here. All right, hi to Natasha, Yale class of 95, who heard Professor Daut on another podcast. Awesome. Keep the introductions coming. I promised Professor Daut that she would see some people that she would be surprised to see today. All right, hi to Lisa from Portland, Yale College class of 77. Who's interested in the presentation. The presentation will be recorded for those of you who, I always get asked that question, and the recording will be made available after the presentation. And I also would love to share that we have themed this presentation on Professor Daut's book. And I'm going to talk about that. So the book is called The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henry Christophe, I believe is how we would pronounce it in French, but my French is terrible. So this book just came out in 2025. It's already won a number of accolades, the 2025 Haitian Studies Book Prize. It was a finalist for the Cundill History Prize. And it is the theme of our presentation today. And because of that, we do have signed copies of the book available for sale through the Yale bookstore. So we're going to put a link in the chat of where you can purchase your signed copy from the Yale bookstore. We will get that shipped out to you if you make the purchase. I encourage you to support our Yale faculty and their scholarships, the work that they're doing by purchasing a copy of this book. So Professor Daut is an award-winning author and scholar. She specializes in Haitian history and culture. And as I said, the topic of the book, The Rise and Fall of Henry Christophe, explores this fascinating life of Haiti's only king while delving into the complex history of a 19th century Caribbean monarchy, a monarchy which, by the way, is tied in many ways to the American Revolution, to the U.S. presence in the Western Hemisphere in the what's called the American Century, which turns on the Louisiana Purchase and turns on the Monroe Doctrine. So we're going to learn about how this little piece of history feeds into all of this much bigger history with which we are more familiar. I want to tell you before we get started about Professor Daut's other books. She has also written Tropics of Haiti, Race and the Literary History of the Haitian Revolution in the Atlantic World. She's written about Baron de Vate and the Origins of Black Atlantic Humanism, and Awakening the Ashes, an intellectual history of the Haitian Revolution, which was published in 2023. And that book is co-winner of the Frederick Douglass Book Prize. Daut's articles on Haitian history and culture have appeared in over a dozen magazines, newspapers, and journals, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, Harper's Bazaar, Essence, The Nation, and the LA Review of Books. She has been the recipient of several awards, grants, and fellowships for her contributions to historical and cultural understandings of the Caribbean, notably from the Ford Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, the Haitian Studies Association, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Robert Silvers Foundation. Daut graduated from Loyola Marymount with a BA in English and French, and she went on to teach in France before enrolling at the University of Notre Dame, where she earned her PhD in English. Since graduating, she has taught Haitian and French colonial history and culture at the University of Miami, the Claremont Graduate University, the University of Virginia, and she also became and remains the series editor of New World Studies at UVA Press. In July of 2022, we at Yale were very fortunate to have her join our community as Professor of French and Black Studies at Yale University. Thank you, Professor Daut, for being here with us today, and I'm going to pass to you to get the presentation going.
Well, thank you so much for this lovely invitation. I'm truly so delighted to be here. I have just been mesmerized by looking at the chat and seeing where everyone is from. And I think I noticed maybe the person who's the farthest away is in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. But thank you for joining us, especially given the time difference. So today I'm going to talk about a figure who is key not just to the Haitian Revolution, as momentous as that was, but who also has something, whose history has something to tell us about the American Revolution, has something to tell us about expansion of the United States across the North American continent, and whose history has something to tell us about the abolition of slavery and the slave trade, and how we got to the concept of modern human rights for our world. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which is always the moment of truth. So hopefully you are seeing there a commemorative image of Henry Christophe that is on a banknote that was issued in Haiti in 2004. So this is the future king of Haiti, first and only. Let's see here. So I always like to begin his story at the very, very beginning, because Henri Christophe, although in his day was essentially known the world over, he's lost in history to us now, but in his own day, he was very well known. You might imagine why. Here's someone who fought in the American Revolutionary War, who became a king in the Caribbean in the early 19th century. This history was extremely fascinating to people, and they wrote about it in France, Great Britain, and the United States, all across the 19th century, including the period of the Harlem Renaissance, where many Black American writers became very interested in his story. But one of the things that happened as a result of this sort of uncanny popularity that he had for over a century is that there arose a lot of mythology and lore about his life, which meant that we didn't know as much that as we could have. A lot of focus was put on his reign as king and how amazing and audacious this was, and less emphasis on, well, who was he as a person? Where did he come from? Do we know things about his parentage? What do we know about the rest of his family? And so with my biography, I really wanted to delve into not just the momentous history he played a part of, but who he was as an individual, which I think gives us key insights into how and why he became Haiti's first and only king. So I start with documents here, because one of the other unfortunate things that happened when a lot of novelists became interested in Christophe's life in the 1920s, for example, is that their novels were then taken as historical fact. And so in my research, I wanted to go back into the documents produced by Henri Christophe and his kingdom in order to give us some answers that were not based on sort of fictional ideas of who he might have been. So there is a lot of speculation about where Christophe was born, but because he was a king and had control of a very powerful printing press, he instructed writers from his kingdom to write down his history for posterity's sake. And that's exactly what they did. And so I've collected these documents because I hope to actually share all of this information, not just that's in the book, but the documents themselves with the public. So that URL that you're seeing there, lagazetteroyale.com, is my website where I have digitized and transcribed with students all of these documents so that others can contribute and further the research as well. This is sort of a big philosophy of mine, is that we don't sort of lock the knowledge away, but that we share it with as many people as possible, especially people in Haiti who might not have as easy access to the book itself. So one of the things that we learn by consulting the first history of Haiti written by a Haitian, 1819, written by Baron de Vatte, called A History of the Revolutions and Civil Wars of Haiti, we learn that Christophe was in fact born on the island of Grenada in 1767. This is important because at the time of his birth, this island in the Southern Caribbean was in British hands. So it's important to know that in the 18th century, the world powers, the European world powers, are constantly at war. And every new treaty they strike, they trade islands in the Caribbean around like trading cards. And Grenada is one of those islands. It had previously been in the hands of the French, but at the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, it was ceded to Great Britain. And so at the time of his birth, though we believe he was born in and enslaved by a French planter, that island was technically in British hands. And so that's 1767. We learn through other documents produced by his kingdom, namely their royal almanacs, which, like most monarchies in the world, they published these every year, and they detailed the entire king's family along with his children's birth dates and their full names. And so from that, which is the second document there, we see that he has a wife named Marie-Louise. And in the book, I detail her family history a bit more. She was born in May 1778. They went on to have actually 4 children together, one of whom died early on. And so this particular version of the almanac lists his 3 surviving children and along with their dates of birth, and also gives us a clue to his extended family by talking about nieces and nephews and their spouses. Another very important thing that we learn from this document is something else that has been debated by historians for some time, which was Henry Christophe's role in the American Revolutionary War. We have been searching for some document that would definitively confirm that he participated, like so many other free men of color, from Saint-Domingue, which is today Haiti. And so we've been looking through the archives, visiting the Georgia Historical Society in Savannah, visiting the archives in France, and I realized we were we were missing a step, which is that history that Henri Christophe commissioned, in which he told his life story to the Baron de Vatte. And so the final document you're looking at there is one that shows a footnote in Vatte's work where it says that the king served in the wars of the United States of America, and he was wounded at the siege of Savannah, which is what they called the Battle of Savannah in Haiti. And this battle took place on October 9th, 1779, when Christophe was only 12 years old. He had just turned 12 3 days before this. And this is a statue that sits in Franklin Square in Savannah, Georgia, that is a monument to these freedom fighters from Saint-Domingue who fought in the American Revolutionary War in Savannah. This was an extremely bloody battle. The French and American patriots lost horribly to the British. So we wonder, how did this affect Christophe as he moved forward? And another point that I should make about this kind of theater of war that he is introduced to at this young age is that this wouldn't have been the first time he experienced war. Remember, I said he was born on Grenada. So how did he get to Georgia? How did he get to Savannah? Well, in 1779, a couple of months before this famous battle takes place, a French count named the Comte d'Estaing led a fleet to the Southern Caribbean as a part of the American Revolutionary War, which is another chapter in this war's history that is less explored, is that there's a Caribbean theater. And the Comte d'Estaing, on behalf of the French, defeats the British in Grenada, in St. Vincent, in St. Lucia, and recaptures those islands from the British and turns them back briefly into French colonies. But the other thing that the Comte d'Estaing does when he captures this British colony is he takes prisoners. And we believe that one of those prisoners, based on letters that he wrote and that other sailors accompanying him wrote, was our young Henry Christophe. And from there, they briefly stopped over that fleet of the Comte d'Estaing in Saint-Domingue as a way station to refuel their supplies. And then they headed north to Savannah during hurricane season, where they experienced rough weather that broke their equipment. They almost starved. And by the time they got to Savannah, they were in terrible condition and they had to fight in marshes, and they ended up losing this battle. So this is Henri Christophe's rude introduction into the rest of the Americas, keeping in mind also that he had already been enslaved, and so who knows what untold tortures and miseries he suffered. This monument depicts him as a drummer boy, precisely because of his young age. The French documents, the laws that created this core or body of free men of color who were able to fight in the American Revolutionary War, stipulated that male children 12 years old could either be drummers or trumpeters. And so the Haitian American Historical Society, which funded this monument, chose to depict him as a drummer. The monument also gives us other key information that is based on historical documents, which are some of the names of the other freedom fighters from Saint-Domingue. Again, free men of color who fight for American independence. And we learn some interesting individuals there. For example, André Rigaud, who will be one of the rivals of Toussaint Louverture, who's, of course, the most famous figure from the Haitian Revolution. We also learn the name of Jean-Baptiste Chavannes, a free man of color who's going to take the knowledge that he learns from the American Revolutionary War. He's going to take the knowledge he gathers from the French Revolutionary War and go back to the colony of Saint-Domingue and argue for equal rights for Saint-Domingue's free men of color. And so this monument, if you ever have the chance to see it, I highly urge you to do so. It does a good job of really telling the history of this very little known but important chapter of the American Revolution. So this tumultuous history, unfortunately, is going to continue for our young Henri Christophe. So in that footnote, recall that Christophe was wounded at the Battle of Savannah. And so when they reload the ships, and the Comte d'Estaing, who is also wounded, has 2 gunshot wounds, when they get back on the ship, they go to Saint-Domingue. It isn't clear if that was their intended destination or if, once again, bad weather pushed them further out to sea. But nonetheless, that's where Christophe ends up. And in some ways, this was potentially the worst place for him to end up. Saint-Domingue at the time had the reputation of being the cruelest slave colony in the Atlantic world. The French forcibly transported between 1697, when they took over the Western Third, to 1791, when the Haitian Revolution breaks out. They forcibly transported more than 900,000 captive Africans onto this island. They landed almost that amount when we subtract for those who likely perished at sea. So that voyage already of the Middle Passage is a treacherous one. And once they got there, the Baron de Vathey cataloged with enormous precision the tortures they suffered, where someone who was born on the island, for example, usually did not live above 15 or 16 years. This is an African born on the island. Those who are forcibly transported there by the French and other world powers usually had a life expectancy of only 2 or 3 years. And what's very important about this source that I'm showing you on your screen now is this is a French writer. He is sent to the colony in the 1770s by the French king in order to explain why there is such a high death rate. This is his mission. And when he goes back to France and he publishes this book in 1776, he blames the tortures and tyrannies of the French colonists on the people they are enslaving. And the French get extremely upset, even though this man, René Michel Hilard de Berthoy, is not at all an abolitionist. His work is filled with racist sentiment. He is simply, from his point of view, cataloging the facts. For cataloging these facts and daring to publish them, this book is pulled out of circulation. He is fined and put into jail. But they couldn't stop the information from spreading because the Baron de Vathey still had a copy in 1814 when he published The Colonial System Unveiled to cite from and to recite this story about how this one man telling the truth that he was sent to tell was punished for daring to point out that the French colonists of Saint-Domingue were practicing some of the cruelest slave tortures in all the Atlantic world. So you can imagine that a place that is teeming with captive Africans has a high death rate. The French transport more than 900,000, but at the time in 1791 that the Haitian Revolution breaks out, there are only 465,000 enslaved Africans on this island. That includes those who were born there. So that just gives you a sheer sense and scale of the death rate here. And so you can imagine that the enslaved, who vastly outnumber the enslavers, start thinking. They say, well, there's 400,000 of us and there's only 25 to 30,000 of them. Let's put our heads together and let's work to achieve a revolution that can end slavery. And so in a spot in northern Haiti called Mont Rouge, on the night of August 14, 1791, enslaved individuals gathered together and they hatched a plot for revolution. And within 1 week, that revolution breaks out. They are burning down the plantations. They are burning down the cane fields. Saint-Domingue is known as a slave colony. It's the richest, or sugar colony rather. It's the richest sugar colony in all the Atlantic world. And here are these enslaved individuals bringing this lucrative empire to a standstill. And so you can imagine the French are very upset. They send militia after militia to try to squash the rebellion, but they also do something that they had become quite adept at and that Henry Christophe is going to learn to use to his own advantage later. They get their propaganda machine going. So instead of saying, oh, the enslaved are striking for their liberty everywhere they go, they say they want liberty, which is what the soldiers had been writing, the French soldiers, in their personal journals that luckily we still have access to. But when we read the French newspapers, they're saying they want to massacre the white planters. They want to get revenge. And they begin publishing all these news stories as soon as the news reaches Paris. They start publishing entire books that contain frontispieces like the one you're looking at here, which shows Black individuals chasing women and children and trying to kill them. So they did everything they could to try to reframe the revolution as being one about achieving liberty from slavery, equality in a world rife with racism, to a kind of race war where enslaved individuals simply wanted to replace their quote unquote masters and be the ones in charge. And so around this time, we see the rise of Christophe's sometimes allies, sometimes rival, Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint Louverture, unlike Christophe, was born on the island of Saint-Domingue to two parents who had been forcibly transported to the island from Africa. Toussaint Louverture, however, he already has free status at the time the revolution breaks out in 1791, and he very quickly becomes one of the leaders of this freedom struggle. And when the French and the British come to invade the island and try to capture it for themselves, Toussaint Louverture is briefly going to join with the Spanish. And the pressure that these freedom fighters, led by Toussaint Louverture, exert onto this colony, having brought once more that sugar economy to a standstill, forces the French to take what is absolutely a drastic step. They abolish slavery in 1793 formally. So the enslaved have already, in a sense, liberated themselves, but the French follow it up with formal decrees in 1793. Then the next February in 1794, the French National Convention does something perhaps even more astonishing. Remember, France has just had a massive revolution. They're debating the rights of man. And now the Jacobin government is going to say, not only is slavery abolished on the island of Saint-Domingue, which will very quickly also include the eastern part that is now the Dominican Republic, but everywhere in French Empire, Guadeloupe, uh, every other island that they have, but not Martinique. And this is important because the French have lost the island of Martinique in yet another battle to the British. And so while Saint-Domingue and Guadeloupe and other islands are going to benefit from this liberty, the island of Martinique will not. Then something else momentous in this world happens. Napoleon Bonaparte comes to power in France in 1799 after having overthrown what is called the Directory government. And he takes a look around and he says, why would we abolish slavery in Guadeloupe? Why would we abolish slavery in Saint-Domingue? And he very quickly makes it his mission, albeit a secret one at first, to reinstate slavery. And this is drastic. If you think about the moment just on Saint-Domingue from 1794 until 1802, when Napoleon is going to put his plan into effect, the island of Saint-Domingue is being run by free Black French citizens. General Louverture, who is a general in the French army at this point, becomes governor general and rules over the entire island of Hispaniola. He even institutes a constitution in 1801 that says slavery will forever remain abolished here, but we will also be free and French. During that time, Henry Christophe also enjoys a rise to fame and power. He becomes a brigadier general, and Toussaint Louverture makes him brigadier general and commander over the city of Cap Français, which is today Cap Haïtien. This port city is the most important port city in all of the Caribbean when you judge from imports and exports. And here it is Christophe, who is commander over this city, right-hand man now to Toussaint Louverture. Well, Napoleon Bonaparte, he wants none of this. Using the pretext of Toussaint Louverture's constitution he had issued, Napoleon Bonaparte says, I'm going to send a massive fleet to this island and I'm going to reinstate my authority. And we're going to reinstate slavery. He sends his brother-in-law in early 1802 for this purpose. This man's name is General Leclerc, and his mission is to arrest, deport Toussaint Louverture, and then one by one turn the other Black generals against each other, and then arrest and deport them to pave the way for the re-establishment of slavery. In fact, in April 1802, Bonaparte issues a decree de facto reinstating the slave trade to the island of Saint-Domingue. But of course, the Black revolutionaries don't know about this yet. They also don't yet know that in May 1802, Bonaparte signs into law that Martinique can persist in slavery. Because again, in that sort of trading of chess pieces, the British have lost the island of Martinique again, or ceded it at the Treaty of Amiens to the French. And now Napoleon Bonaparte has a decision. Will he allow Martinique to be a slave colony in the seat of a French republic that says slavery is abolished? Or will he issue a separate decree saying that slavery can continue in Martinique? And he chooses the latter. And this is truly astonishing. It makes France the only country in the world to reinstate slavery after previously abolishing it. Because Napoleon doesn't stop there. In July 1802, he issues a decree reinstating slavery in Guadeloupe and other French territories. Once more, this is astonishing when you think that slavery has already been abolished since 1794. And so what you're looking at on your screen there are these documents whereby Napoleon permits slavery to persist in Martinique per the Treaty of Amiens, and the consular document reestablishing slavery in Guadeloupe and other French overseas territories. Just to give you a sense of how buried this history has previously been, up until 2021, at a bicentennial commemorative exhibit for Napoleon, who died in May 1821, these documents had never been put on public display in France. So in archives, they were available to researchers, but the French public was not able to fully access or see these documents, which is very important because slavery persists in France, in French overseas colonies, until 1848. So reinstated in 1802, 46 long years later. And so there's just sort of a lot of explaining to do about how it is that France is the only country to ever have to abolish slavery twice. And these documents partially tell that story. If we go back to Saint-Domingue, we will see that things will unfold very differently, but in some ways, no less tragically. General Leclerc arrives on the island in February 1802, and he's at this most important port, and the first person he has to encounter is General Henry Christophe. Leclerc tries to threaten him, saying, even though I have 30,000 troops with me, which is the largest expedition ever to set sail from France at the time, he says, I come in peace. And Christophe is wary. So he says, no, I need to inform Governor General Louverture and get his permission. However, Louverture happened to be on the eastern side of the island, which is today the Dominican Republic. And so it took some time for Christophe to be able to inform him. And in that interim, he's going to have a famous exchange with General Leclerc. He says, I have the honor of informing you that I cannot deliver these forts and posts over which I have been given command before having received an order from the Governor General Toussaint Louverture, from whom I derive my authority. So this is already audacious. He's telling this other French general, this white French general, I don't answer to you. I answer to Governor General Louverture. So although he did tell his aide-de-camp to go and inform Louverture about the arrival of this massive expedition, he also famously said to Leclerc, if you decide to land anyway, if you realize these threats, I will resist as an officer general must, and you will only enter the city of Cap after having watched it be reduced to ashes. And even upon these ashes, I will fight you. General Leclerc calls his bluff, and as soon as the winds are favorable, he begins to try to land those troops. And Christophe makes good on his promise. He has the city evacuated of women and children, and he tells the soldiers to set the city on fire. For this, the French call him, as you see there on your screen, the arsonist of Cap, of the city of Cap. However, this history is remembered differently in Haiti. Here looking at a more recent painting by Dieudonné Pluviose of Christophe burning Cap Haïtien. What's noteworthy is he has his arms sort of outstretched and people are celebrating him because he is keeping the French at bay. You're also looking at his statue, which sits on the Champ de Mars in the city of Port-au-Prince today and is still standing. One of the reasons I think the French didn't believe that Christophe was actually going to set the city on fire is because the city of Cap Français had already suffered another fire in 1793. And so this map you're looking at here shows that the majority of the city, especially its center, was burned down at this fire, which happens in the middle of the revolution prior to the abolition, the formal abolition of slavery. And so all those kind of black and gray buildings, those are all the buildings that had suffered fire damage. And when Christophe started to become important in this free Black French colony now, post the Emancipation Proclamation, he is in charge with helping to rebuild the city. And the French government puts out a number of maps that show the progress of this rebuilding. And so this map is a little bit counterintuitive. The red areas are places that had never burned. And the key here tells us that the pink and gray and yellow are at various stages of either not being rebuilt or having authorization to be rebuilt. And so you see that the French are probably thinking, he has spent so much time and effort helping to rebuild this city that he really has called home ever since he came back from the Savannah expedition. Why would he go and burn it down? And in fact, even his own troops said later they were surprised that he actually went through with it. But he was extremely serious in understanding the threat that the Leclerc expedition posed. For this, both Christophe and Toussaint Louverture will be declared outlaws of France. And the decree says not just that they're outlaws, but that every citizen is ordered to treat them as follows: rebels of the French Republic, which means they are essentially the French saying any French citizen can kill them, can capture them, can summarily arrest them. Things are going to take a terrible turn, however. In April 1802, Christophe is going to listen to some entreaties from Leclerc, who is begging him for an audience. Leclerc is saying, I come in peace. He's issuing proclamations in Creole, in Haitian Creole. He's saying, we have come as friends. Why are you fighting us as enemies? We're the French Republic. We've abolished slavery, not mentioning that they're reinstating it and reinstating the slave trade. And unfortunately, Christophe is taken in by this. He listens to Leclerc. Leclerc says, you'll still be able to be a general. Your family will be protected. And Christophe's brief defection to the French leads to the defection of other key generals, including later Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the founder of independent Haiti, Charles Belair, Toussaint Louverture's nephew. And so in May 1802, with his own meeting with Leclerc on the horizon, Toussaint Louverture decides to retire. Leclerc offers him the same sort of amnesty, quote unquote. He says, you can still retain your rank in the French army. We'll protect you, your wife, your children. Everyone will be fine. And Louverture says, no, I'm just going to go home and retire to my plantations. But Leclerc and his right-hand man, a French general named Brunet, do not believe that Toussaint Louverture has truly defected or truly put down his arms. And so on June 7th, 1802, they hatch a plot to force him into a meeting where they summarily arrest him, deport him, send him to France. They lock him in a very cold prison near Switzerland called the Fort du Joux. And he is not accustomed to this climate. He does not have medical care. He does not have wood. His cell is frequently below freezing. The French jailers record all of this information. And his body is found in April 1802. Again, with the sort of French propaganda machine, they initially try to cover this death up. But a rogue French newspaper reports the death at the end of April 1803, and the news then quickly travels to Great Britain, is posted in the Times of London, where it travels to the United States, and where the news likely by that June of 1803 had also reached the colony of Saint-Domingue. This is important because you might imagine that the freedom fighters, including the generals, the black generals who had recently defected to the French, might find this concerning. They also find something else concerning, however. General Leclerc, by the end of summer 1802, so he's gotten rid of Louverture, he sent him to France, he's out of the way, he starts to put into plan the second part of his plot, which is to arrest or kill the other black generals, principally by trying to turn them against one another. And in his letters that he sends home to the Minister of the Marine in France and to Napoleon Bonaparte himself, he essentially asks for authorization to use genocidal tactics. He says, we have to destroy all the blacks in the mountains, men and women, and spare only the children under 12 years of age. We must destroy half of those in the plains and not leave a single colored person in the colony who was worn an epaulette. And these genocidal tactics included mass drownings. Eyewitnesses from England and the United States wrote home about them. French soldiers in their journals complained about having to carry out these executions. They also included suffocating people in what they called bateaux à vapeur, or sulfur ships, by letting the fumes gather in the hold where they imprisoned people, suffocating and then dumping their bodies into the sea. And all of this just makes the freedom fighters defect from the French side and want to fight the French more ardently. And it is around this time that the revolutionaries are going to change their motto from liberty or death to independence or death. And this is a famous painting illustrating the Congress of Arcueil, which is where we believe that Dessalines in May 1803 gathered the revolutionaries together and said, we must be united. And this painting depicts him ripping the white out of the French tricolor flag, whereby a woman named Catherine Flanc, depicted in this picture, is going to sew the red and blue back together, which gives us the current Haitian flag. And so this painting is attempting to illustrate this kind of momentous moment when the revolutionaries decide it's not enough to abolish slavery, we also have to get independence. The French revolutionaries are victorious. The Haitian revolutionaries, excuse me, are victorious. They fight a definitive battle on November 18th, 1803, called the Battle at Vertières, led by Jean-Jacques Dessalines and a man named Capois Lamort, François Capois, and they defeat this fiercest army. And this is astonishing to the rest of the world. And they do something more than defeat this army. They declare Haitian independence, with a preliminary independence at the end of that November in 1803, and formal Haitian independence coming in January 1st, 1804. They also changed the name of the island from Saint-Domingue to Haiti, which is one of its indigenous appellations. But before I get into the period of independence, I want to pause for a moment, because while the Haitian revolutionaries were victorious, while they were exceedingly proud of their victory, they were also exceedingly sad. They had lost many people. They had lost family members. Christophe, I mentioned, loses his own son. He sent his first son, Francois Ferdinand, to France to be educated. And in retaliation for his father's participation in the Haitian War of Independence, the French throw the child into the streets of France, allow him to be beaten to death and die an orphan, a lonely orphan, in July 1805. And so each of the revolutionaries, while they could talk about all the battles they won, they could also talk about all the people they lost. And I have a quote here from Julien Prévost, who ended up being a count under King Henry Christophe's rule. And this is about what Napoleon's men did in Haiti and why the Haitians would never, ever consider Napoleon to be a hero. He said, "Whether or not he has the qualities of a great man hardly matters to me. If he has done great things, so be it. He extended and receded the limits of his empire. Still, what interest can I take in his greatness, in his glory even? None. I see and want to see in him only the enemy of my country, who through his agents covered it with ruins, blood, dead bodies, and wreckage." This monument is a monument to the freedom fighters at Vertières that stands in Haiti. And I think one of the most kind of powerful things about it is the looks on the faces of the figures. They look proud, but they also are looking up seemingly to heaven, to the sky. There's fallen soldiers and horses around them. It's really a recognition that all of this came at a huge price. And why? And yet, the Haitian revolutionaries had the fortitude not just to proclaim a free and independent and slavery-free nation, but to try to protect it, to make it prosperous. It's astonishing that they have this vision after all they have suffered personally and collectively. And so in the post-independence period, the three main actors who we need to know in our story are General Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who will initially become Governor General of independent Haiti, and then will take the title of Emperor Jacques I, because contrary to popular belief, Haiti's first political and state formation was not a republic. It was actually an empire. And in May 1805, the Haitian revolutionaries under Dessalines issue a new constitution for the Empire of Haiti that names Jean-Jacques Dessalines as Emperor Jacques I. Dessalines quickly names Henri Christophe the general-in-chief of his army in recognition of his importance to the revolution, but also he knows that Christophe is tactically useful, very, very smart, and beloved in northern Haiti. Alexandre Pétion, whom we're meeting here for the first time, is a free man of color. And he came from a free Black family in the colony. And he fought on the side of the Haitian revolutionaries, sometimes with them, against them in that period where they're waffling back and forth. But nonetheless, Dessalines makes him a division general over the western part of the country, which includes the city of Port-au-Prince. And these three men are going to have a bit of a rivalry. For example, Alexandre Pétion watches with a bit of wariness as Dessalines becomes emperor. He doesn't really agree with this. He is probably also a little bit jealous of Christophe, who gets to be named general-in-chief of the Haitian army. And so Pétion, along with some other conspirators from the south and west of Haiti, the bottom peninsula of the country, they hatch a plot to assassinate Dessalines, or at least rid him of his power. And on October 17th, 1806, they assassinate the emperor just outside Port-au-Prince on a bridge called the Pont Rouge. And so you're looking at a contemporary effort to depict this moment that is going to not only shock the Haitian populace, because Haitians up to this point were fighting an enemy power, and now they're fighting themselves. And what happens is that fighting and those divisions are only going to increase and lead to an actual civil war. At first, Christophe listens to the Southerners and the Westerners who say they have all these grievances against Dessalines, but as soon as he figures out that he potentially is next, he decides to flee to the north, to the renamed city of Cap-Haïtien, his beloved city, where he decides to set up a separate state. So now he's going to rule over a divided Haiti. And he's going to take the very modest title of President and Generalissimo of the forces of the earth and seas of the state of Haiti. Now, Pétion, however, is not having any of this. He sets up a rival republic. So Christophe is ruling over what he called a state. He never used the term republic. Pétion gets his dream of setting up a republic, and he becomes president. And so essentially, all the way from Saint-Marc in kind of a diagonal line just above Croix-de-Bouquet, this is going to be the Republic of Haiti. The rest is the Kingdom of Haiti. But you wonder, how long can they persist in these divisions? Because they're not just fighting each other with words, they are also physically fighting each other, each one's troops trying to take over the other's territory. This civil war actually provides an opening for Christophe to do something that he had kind of played around with in his mind for a while. He wanted to become a king. His counselors of state propose this to him in March 1811, and he accepts, issues a new constitution for northern Haiti, and he is crowned king on June 2nd, 1811. His wife, Marie-Louise, becomes Queen Marie-Louise. His son, Prince Victor-Henri, becomes the heir to the throne, and his daughters, Améthyste and Athénaïre, become the princesses. And so you're looking here at a later effort to depict the white French priest from Brittany, Father Corneille Brel, who crowned Christophe king on June 2nd, 1811. Now, although in the south of Haiti, they definitely made fun of Christophe for becoming a king, in the United States, they expressed some shock and consternation. In France, they poked fun at him, even though they also had an emperor who had crowned himself, Napoleon, of course. They still were astonished by this king, even though he became a king in a world of kings. And we can tell from this Italian broadside that dates from 1813 that there were attempts to sort of visually poke fun or mock him. So you see him here, he's dressed in this sort of inappropriate attire for the climate. And there's some interesting faces there in the background. But Christophe controls a powerful printing press. He's also set up an academy of painting and drawing. He can really kind of shape his image, and he knows that the rest of the world is paying attention to his self-representation. And so he brings foreign artists over, including a British portraitist named Richard Evans, who comes and takes up a position at this Academy of Drawing and Painting and paints this famous portrait of Christophe that you are looking at on your screen. And this is how Christophe chose to self-represent. In his military uniform, there still is the shadow of the crown there in the corner. He's wearing the gold cross of the Order of St. Henry, and he is above all a military man. The central image here that you're looking at is a more contemporary painter, Edouard Duval-Carrier, who sought to sort of play with the image that the Italians had put forward and create something that would recognize Christophe's homage to the Taino, or the indigenous population of Haiti. Christophe had a great affinity for thinking about the former population and their struggles against the Spanish, and he claimed that he derived his fortitude from thinking about all they had lived through. While there were efforts to mock his rule and reign, there was also fascination and even admiration. What you're looking at on your screen are various translations of his codes and books of law and the formation of the aristocracy that he created. So these documents circulated in Spain, in Mexico, in Philadelphia, in New York. And this is because Christophe had set up a society that was supposed to run on free labor after slave labor. So you can see how the other world powers where slavery still existed would be immensely interested in how you can take a slave labor economy to a free labor economy. And one of the things that the Code Henri stipulates is that the laborers on any plantations, and their main plantations are producing coffee crops at this point, not sugar, that these laborers are supposed to share in the profits. Now, this is great in theory, but there are questions about whether or not it happened in practice. But nonetheless, the rest of the world, including in Great Britain, are looking at this society and saying, what can we learn from what King Henri is trying to do in Haiti? They were also astonished at the level of culture and artistic production and literary and musical forms that were coming out of the Kingdom of Haiti. In fact, US and British merchants frequently stayed in Haiti. They frequently wrote home. So it's interesting to watch as US and British newspapers, for example, report on the comings and goings of the king and queen and their parties and Christophe's school system that he was making national at the time of his death, the painting and mathematical academies, the hospitals and pharmacies that he had set up. But they also talked about the iconography. They talked about his coat of arms, which says, God is my cause and my sword, which is his motto, along with this golden phoenix, which is what he's most known by, sort of from an iconography or visual standpoint, that it might be hard to read there on your screen, but it says, Je renais de mes cendres on the ribbon, I am reborn from my ashes. And this is the emblem that's at atop every issue of the Royal Haitian newspaper. You can also find it today, more recently, on this commemorative coin issued by UNESCO for the 200th anniversary of Haitian independence in 2004. But perhaps the most recognizable of Christophe's accomplishments from a visual standpoint is the Citadelle La Ferrière, which was called the Citadelle Henri in his day. You're looking at it on your screen. It is the largest fortress in North America. It was widely considered to be the eighth wonder of the world. Anyone who saw it in person was awed by it. It was vast like a city. It had its own printing press, its own chateau or home for the king and his family. It could house 30,000 people. It had stores of food and ammunition. It was designed to be able to protect the Haitian military from and give them a place to get ammunition and to collect their weapons in case the French ever came to invade. And this was not just paranoia. The French, under Napoleon and his successor, Louis XVIII, during the Bourbon Restoration, repeatedly tried to quote unquote restore Saint Domingue. That's the euphemism they used for reasserting French control and dominance, turning independent Haiti back into a French colony, and yes, reinstating slavery. And Christophe was able to rebuff them at every turn through his own military cunning tactics and the intelligence operations that he put into effect when the French would send their spies to sort of sound out the king's disposition, to sound out Alexandre Pétion in the South's disposition. And so Christophe became known for this massive citadel. I also mentioned his love for music and the theater, and so they put on the Haitian people plays that were written by Haitian writers. Sometimes they performed French plays and operas as well by Voltaire and Rousseau and others, but many times they were performing original operas written by other Haitian citizens. A man named the Comte de Rosier, Just Chanlat, he wrote this opera that you're looking at here, The King's Hunting Party. And the year 1820 is very important because this play was performed on January 1st, 1820, in honor of Haitian Independence Day. And in this opera, the king goes missing for a time, and everyone is worried about him. And in 10 months' time, the king would go missing forever, because he is going to die in October 1820. But we are not quite there yet. That play sort of foreshadowing what's going to happen. It is important to talk about what are some of the things that sort of laid the groundwork for the tragedy of the king's death. Well, if we return to that citadel, I like this contemporary image from 1962 because it shows the massive labor operation that was needed to create the citadel. Because you look at the building, you see that it sits atop one of the highest mountain peaks in Haiti, that to get there, you have to go up a dangerously treacherous path that is angled at 35 degrees. And you think, how did they get the stones and the bricks and the nails and everything up and the people up there? And it's a massive labor operation. And this is an effort to depict that. You could get sent up to work on the citadel if you couldn't pay your taxes. Christophe had laws saying that every Haitian citizen had to be active and could not be idle. And one of the things they said was that you had to be engaged in a profession that was useful for the state. And that's not the same as being engaged in a profession that might be useful to an individual or their own family. If you broke laws, you could get sent up to hard labor. You could be imprisoned in the citadel, which was also an actual large prison. And if you were imprisoned there, you almost never came out. And at the same time as this massive labor operation is underway, the king and his family are reputed for their parties, for their carriages. They have multiple carriages. Each of the princesses and the prince have their own carriage that they've ordered from England, and that the British newspapers write about their opulence and the jewels that the queen has and the fancy dresses that the princesses are wearing. And so you can imagine that the Haitian people who are laboring might begin to think, well, why is there such a vast cavern between my situation and the situation of the king, his family, the military, and the nobles, the massive aristocracy that Christophe is building? Because he needed a labor force also to build his famous palace called the Palais de Sans Souci, Sans Souci meaning without worry in French. It was also reputed for its beautiful architecture, its massive fountains, its lush greenery, its flowers. And you think, first of all, it has to be built. Who is doing the building? It has to be maintained. There's a massive operation that has to be put into place to keep the grounds beautiful, to serve on his staff. And so you're looking at a painting there done by a young painter in the kingdom named Numa de Roche from 1816. Christophe kind of took him under his wing and kind of adopted him. He went to school at that Academy of Painting and Drawing I mentioned. And the middle image is an image from a German engraver. And the final image is the palace as it unfortunately stands today. Unlike the citadel, which is still largely intact, has been able to be refurbished multiple times by UNESCO and other organizations in Haiti, the citadel, the palace at Sans-Souci was crumbled by a massive earthquake that struck northern Haiti in May 1842. And so the photograph you're looking at is the ruins of the palace at Sans-Souci as it stands today. Even though it is in ruins, in some ways, it's still a powerful image. In some ways, even more powerful than standing atop the citadel. You stand there and you feel what it was. And you feel what it was that Christophe tried to build, that his means were sort of at odds with the world in which he lived, in which no other world power was willing to recognize Haitian independence. They frequently threatened and issued trade embargoes, famously under Thomas Jefferson during the reign of Dessalines, but that also stretched into the early reign of Christophe. And you think about the pressure that he was under and that he still had this vision of what he wanted to build there. So I just tried to include some photographs that would give you a sense of the scale of this building and help to think about what it was in its day. These are the royal children of Haiti who he lived there in the palace with. This painting sits in Mupana, which is the main museum in Port-au-Prince to this day. And so this is just to give you an idea. That's Victor Henri and his sisters Améthyste and Athénaïre. And once more, Christophe loved the idea of portraiture. And this just shows the opulence and wealth that they lived amidst. This is an effort to depict one of the balls that Christophe was famous for. Those foreign merchants would write home, as I mentioned, and talk about these famous balls, and contemporary or more contemporary painters have tried to illustrate that. But the person who's missing in all this, whose portrait is missing in all of this, is in fact the Queen, Queen Marie-Louise Croix David. So we have portraits of the children, we have multiple portraits of her husband done in the era, but to this date, we don't have any extant images of Queen Marie-Louise. However, in recent years, multiple Haitian paintings done in the era, including the painting of the Christophe children, have come to light. And so I always like to mention this because people sometimes don't know what they have, and then we'll find an art dealer selling a painting that we end up realizing has this immense historical portrait that people sometimes find in their attics, their grandparents' attics, their parents' attic. And yet contemporary artists, like with the Christophe balls and carriages and that image of the citadel, the painting I showed you, contemporary artists have tried to imagine Queen Marie-Louise in different, more artistic forms. And so you're looking here at the Dominican artist Fiorle Baez's installation called For Marie-Louise Croix David, Exiled Keeper of Order, Anacaona. And Anacaona is also important because, like Edouard Duval-Carrier, who gave a nod to Christophe's love for the indigenous population and their history and his honoring them, Marie-Louise here is likened to Anacaona, who is one of the cacique queens of Zaragua in 15th and 16th century Haiti, and she ruled over the region near what is now the city of Léogâne. But like all good things and all bad things, at least I always say, I hope all bad things come to an end. The king's reign was going to end. In August 1820, Christophe suffered a stroke at a church in Limonade, and it left him debilitated. Reports from his Scottish doctor were that he was partially paralyzed on one side, and that he had become, in the wake of this, as he's kind of convalescing, so he doesn't die, and the Scottish doctor, Duncan Stewart, is able to revive him, but he's got to stay, Christophe, in Limonade, so away from Millau, away from where his palace is, away from Cap Haïtien, or Cap Henri, as he had renamed the city after himself. And in that absence, a conspiracy is formed. On the one side, you have the nobles under a man named Richard forming a conspiracy, and you also have a military conspiracy seated in the city of Saint-Marc. And so although Christophe seems to kind of miraculously begin to get better as fall wears on, this conspiracy is unable to be stopped. And by the time Christophe really comes to believe and understand how deep the conspiracy is in the first week of October 1820, it's far too late. Some of the troops, in fact, the majority of the troops that he sends to crush the rebellion, end up joining the rebellion. And so what you're looking at there is an engraving done after a 19th century painting depicting the moments on October 8th, 1820, after Christophe commits suicide by shooting himself in the heart. And so you see these soldiers rush in. Some might say to try to save the king. Some might say they are the soldiers who sought to harm him. There is the character there sort of wielding a sword and seems ready to pounce. The image I juxtaposed it with is by Philomé Aubin, and the Aubin family are a very famous family of painters from northern Haiti. And this is supposed to be Christophe's funeral. But of course, in the historical record, Christophe doesn't have a funeral. In fact, famously, his wife and his children carry his body, his dead body, up to the citadel in the middle of the night, bury it in a courtyard at the top of the citadel, and cover it with lime to protect the conspirators and their allies from desecrating his body in death, as they had done to Dessalines in the south after he had been assassinated. And so he never has a funeral. And yet Philomé Aubin is showing here an imagined state funeral that has more to tell us about the attempt at reconciliation, perhaps, than history, right? You'll notice that Christophe's tomb is covered in the red and blue flag of contemporary Haiti, whereas Christophe's flag was famously red and black. That is not where the story ends, however. I wish I could say after that it was all, glory and prosperity, but Pétion had died in 1818, and his successor in the Southern Republic was a man named Jean-Pierre Boyer, who had fought a little bit in the War of Independence with the Haitian revolutionaries. Nonetheless, he comes to power as president. He's able to quickly reunite the north and the south of Haiti after Christophe's suicide, and the eastern side of the island, today the Dominican Republic. In 1822, Boyer is able to reunite. The entire island is now the Republic of Haiti. So you think everything's going well so far. But Boyer also wants recognition of Haitian independence. Stop the threats constantly coming from France, which is now was going to be under a new king soon, Charles X, and those threats are going to continue. But when Charles X does a sudden about face and says, okay, you want us to recognize your independence? You have to pay us 150 million francs, which is an astonishing sum of money, more than 500 million US dollars in 19th century dollars, more than 20 billion, some say 40 billion in today's US dollars. And Boyer stuns the Haitian Republic when he agrees. There's a massive fleet behind this expedition that comes with the decree. There's all kinds of pressures, and yet he caves. And now the French say, we recognize your independence, but you're indebted to us. And this debt essentially bankrupts Haiti. It continues. They continue to have to pay it throughout the 19th century. They take out subsequent loans, which make them indebted for paying off France, but now to the United States and Germany, and all the way until 1957. Haitians do not finish paying this part of the debt. And so when people say to me, what is Christophe's or King Henri's most important legacy? It would be tempting to say the citadel, or the palace, that beautiful culture he tried to build, even the schools, the national school system that he had set up. But in some ways, I think it's his obstinance to not ever capitulate to the French. That idea of paying France an indemnity was floated to him in his era, and he frequently and always told his ministers to issue one response: inadmissible. They said, why would we pay the French? If anyone owes anyone money, they owe us reparations. And so I firmly believe that his greatest legacy was in understanding how that indemnity would basically cut Haiti off at the knees while it was still in its infant state trying to build a free and prosperous country. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all being here this evening.
Thank you, Professor Doubt. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. Fiona is saying in the chat, such great storytelling on a rich and complicated history. And I agree with that. I feel like I was watching like a page turner novel turned into a movie. I mean, just fantastic. I also want to acknowledge really your very deft use of artwork throughout this presentation. Not only did we get an education on history, but I believe we also got a bit of an education on art and how these incidents are depicted and imagined in the contemporary Haitian imagination and art community. So thank you for that as well. We have a number of questions in the chat, and I want to let everyone know we will do our best to get to all the questions. We'll spend about 30 minutes on questions, and I believe that should give us time to cover everything. This presentation has been recorded, and the Q&A will be recorded as well. So for those of you who want to watch it later or who want to share it with family and friends, it will be available on the Yale Alumni Academy website and YouTube channel and will be open to anyone who wants to view it. And everyone who is registered for this presentation will receive an email with a link to that webpage. I also promised Professor Doubt that I would be the shameless self-promoter on her behalf. So I really encourage you to pick up a copy of her book. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat so that you can um, follow the link to the Yale bookstore where you can purchase a copy of The Life and Times of Haiti's first, last, and only king, Henry Christophe. And Professor Doubt has very kindly signed these copies for all of you. I want to encourage you, lastly, to please put your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat, because I can follow your questions and make sure I cover as many as possible in the Q&A box. It's easier for me. And I actually want to kick it off with our sort of subhead for our promotions on this was really talking about what does the life and times of Henri Christophe have to do with the American Revolution and with the Louisiana Purchase and the Monroe Doctrine and the American century, the dawn of the American century at the beginning of the 20th century. And so I promised Professor Doubt that I would draw a line between those things because there is a connection. There's a moment in time where America represents an independent Haiti and seeks a diplomatic relationship with it. And in fact, a little known fact, but Frederick Douglass becomes sort of the U.S. envoy to Haiti in that moment. And so I just wonder, Professor Dowd, if you can articulate, just to make it very clear for people, like what role does the life and times of Haiti's first, last, and only king play in the Louisiana Purchase and the sort of domino effect that leads to the Monroe Doctrine being a part of the American ethos in the 20th century and leads to the American process of becoming sort of the dominant global force in the Western Hemisphere.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's easy to, sort of not acknowledge or not really fully kind of contextualize the fact that in the early 19th century, these first few years of Haitian independence, last few years of the Haitian Revolution, the United States wasn't the dominant world power or force, and in fact, had to worry about France, had to worry about upsetting and angering Great Britain. And Haiti comes into play with that because the Haitians actually, in their first few years of independence, are pretty allied with Great Britain, even though Great Britain is not formally recognizing their independence. That's their greatest trading power, followed by the United States. And in fact, when Thomas Jefferson issues the trade embargo in 1806, it is allowed to expire in 1810 because Northern merchants in the United States complain about it because this is harming their businesses. And so this speaks to sort of the back and forth relationship that Haiti is going to have with the United States, where they sometimes can't tell if they're dealing with a friend or with a foe. But yes, it is absolutely true that independent Haiti actually helps the United States out And so before they issue that trade embargo under Jefferson, they're going to make a huge deal with France that's going to double the size of the country, the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, so just prior to Haitian independence, but everyone knows it's coming. Jefferson has already gotten a letter from Jean-Jacques Dessalines who's basically saying, we're not gonna, Jefferson doesn't respond to this letter, I might add, but he's saying, we're not gonna stay French, so you've got to decide what your next move is going to be vis-a-vis what we hope will be an independent state. And so this agreement then changes Haiti's relationship to the Americas, but not initially for the better. Once that trade embargo expires in 1810, trade will resume. But again, this is still pretty precarious for both nations. Haiti is able to assert itself under Henry Christophe and actually when US merchants bring a lawsuit against Christophe, he basically laughs at them and says, I don't respond to you. So it's a different moment in Haitian history where we see Haiti having to respond to US interests, having to sort of make nice, having to give in to all these capitulations. At this moment, the United States doesn't have that kind of power. And one of the things that happens under President Monroe later in the 1820s, in a famous speech to Congress that gets termed later the Monroe Doctrine, is he says, we want to create solidarity between all the American states and keep any European incursions in our hemisphere at bay. But unfortunately, when the Congress of Panama happens in South America, led by Simon Bolivar, who, by the way, Alexandre Pétion furnished with weapons, money, and men to get Colombia, which includes, Venezuela and Colombia and other states today, free. So they get help from Haiti, but then they turn around and exclude Haiti from the Congress of Panama. So this is kind of a turning point moment. The US has said, no, this is our hemisphere. And by which they literally meant our, like the United States, not our shared hemisphere, as it would turn out later. But they sounded like they were inviting the other American nations to the table. But Haiti, being a lone sort of Black independent nation in the Americas, was too much to bear. And so from that moment forward, including the indemnity, what we will see are the series of steps that led to Haiti being kind of treated as a threat to ongoing US slavery, to the ideas of democracy, because Haiti is showing that you can abolish slavery. And it ends up being a threat that lasts, I think, all the way up until the US occupation in the 20th century, which is when the US really kind of brings down the hammer.
So much history that really is frequently not discussed enough, and this idea that Napoleon Bonaparte is this hegemonic power, and it takes the little island nation of Haiti to throw him out of the Western Hemisphere, and the U.S. You and I were talking before the chat. The U.S. gets fed by Haiti, really, a nice tasty fish in the form of the Louisiana Purchase, for the U.S. So we get this westward expansion of the U.S. and then the U.S. turns around and becomes the big fish on the back of that. So it's really fascinating. I think we've answered Orna Kutai, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, had the question of why did the U.S. and other nations support France in demanding reparations? And I think the thing that you just said is the answer to that question. And I want to go to Mira's question, or Mira or Myra. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly, because I think this is one that a lot of people have in the audience, which is Henri Christophe, names himself king on the heels of an imperial power, a predecessor who had named himself emperor. And Myra asked, did he or his associates consider a democratic government a republic, right? It's just fascinating that he fights for the American Revolution. There's an inspiration coming from the French Revolution, and yet when the opportunity arises, he establishes a monarchy. And the question is, why go in that direction versus one more oriented towards social reform?
Well, the sort of easy answer is that he has great veneration for Great Britain, and they have a constitutional monarchy, and that's what he sets up. This is a constitutional monarchy. But the more complex answer is that for them, republican forms of government, meaning the United States and France, are places where freedom and equality are proclaimed, but where slavery still reigns. So think about it. From their standpoint, the United States is not a true democracy because they have disenfranchised and enslaved a great deal of the population simply because of the color of their skin and family origins. And so for them, the United States being a republic is not a motto because they have fought to abolish slavery. The French case is even more egregious. They proclaimed the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, instituted a republic, and who came in? Napoleon Bonaparte. He establishes himself as first consul, essentially becomes a dictator, and reinstates slavery while France is still a republic. So they associate, from Christophe's standpoint, because they're very clear. They actually, and I talk about this in the book, issue a number of documents explaining their entire rationale for creating a monarchy. And it is principally that republics are obviously unstable, incoherent places where you say one thing and you do the opposite thing. Now, again, with the complexity, Great Britain does, yes, abolish the slave trade in 1807, but not slavery itself, and they don't issue a law to abolish slavery until 1833. It doesn't go into effect until 1834 and not fully into effect until 1838. So although they are looking to Great Britain as sort of paving a way, they're not all the way. And when you think about it from an enslaved person's perspective of 30 more years, it's a long way to go still on the case of Great Britain even.
And of course, Great Britain having a real economic motivation as to why they were doing that more than a sort of an ethical motivation. Um,
Absolutely.
I want to go to a question that since we're talking about slavery, I want to go to this question on the idea of the Henri's experiment in free labor. So Marin asks, was that successful? Was the coffee economy self-sustaining? And how did this influence England, the US, and France?
Yeah, it's a great question because, it's almost like we couldn't see what Christophe was going to do. We only saw what he was about to do, right? And so I would say initially that this free labor wasn't too successful because people who enriched themselves tended to be nobles and military members who would get these leases for the plantations that were owned by the former enslavers. Um, but towards the end of his reign, around 1817 and then into 1818, Christophe begins to understand that you can't really force people to work this way without adequate compensation. Even though he's telling them we have to make all this money so that we can have a strong military and we can have a citadel and other fortresses around northern Haiti because the French are coming. And every time the French send another one of their little spy missions, they make sure to publicize it in the Haitian newspaper. They make sure all the Haitian people know about it. So he says to them constantly in this sort of very paternalistic way, I am your father and you are the children and I know what's best for you and listen to me and work hard. And if I have to punish you, it's for your own good. And it's only towards the end of his reign that he realizes, because there are little mini rebellions in the kingdom, that people don't want to work this hard if there isn't something that is immediately benefiting them. And so he starts to open up the coffee leases. He starts visiting and goes on various tours of different towns and bourgs around northern Haiti to basically say, I'm not your enemy. I have your best interest at heart. I'm going to bring you schools. We're setting up a school system. I'm bringing you roads and hospitals and medicine. The smallpox vaccine was a big one. And and it seems for a time like they believe this and it's maybe going to work out. But again, that stroke, that conspiracy, the unrest, the memories maybe of what had gone on before, it was all, he couldn't overcome it.
Okay, I want to point to a comment that someone made that this is all particularly poignant on the day that HSS terminates Haiti's temporary protected status designation in the U.S. And I also want to, just add to that, also poignant that your book is being released just a year prior to the U.S. celebrating its 250th year since 1776, right, which is widely considered the birth of the modern U.S. democracy. So, the role of this story and the role of Haiti to contributing to the U.S., dominance in the world, really in the world order, has not been told. So I want to go to another question that kind of brings in the Dominican Republic angle. And as we do that, I also want to point to, this story turns the wheels that bring the U.S. to the Spanish-American War as well in many ways, and that Haiti is actually ironically where Christopher Columbus landed when he landed in the Americas, right? So in 1892 and 1893, the U.S. celebrate 400 years since the arrival of Christopher Columbus, and then turn around and in the following period, they look to build a naval base in Haiti, and they look to start the Spanish-American War. So talking about the Dominican Republic is really important. And I want to go to Kenneth's question, who says Jared Diamond and Collapse suggests that Haiti and the Dominican Republic represent a tragic controlled experiment, that given the same resources, the difference in governance ended up creating the tragedy of current day Haiti. The draconian methods of the French plantation managers were passed on to the revolutionaries, and that Henry Christophe was unpopular because he utilized a lot of forced labor. So Jared is Kenneth is referring to this Jared Diamond book called Collapse, and he says, this happened in spite of the wealth that Haiti had to work with in terms of sugar, that poor governance, coupled with one quarter of the Dominican Republic, sort of led to this different outcome from Haiti than the Dominican Republic. So I wonder if you could comment on Kenneth's comment here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece that's missing from that analysis is the 1825 indemnity, because actually Haiti and the Dominican Republic were one under Boyer's rule, as I mentioned, from 1822 until 1844. Boyer was overthrown in a coup d'etat in 1843, which opens the door for this sort of Dominican separatist movement, and Dominican Republic will separate in 1844. And already the Dominican elite was using kind of racial arguments to say why they should separate, even though the Haitians are the ones who ended slavery for them. It's hard to imagine still that on one half of the island there was a free, a kingdom and a republic, and then a republic, and on the other side, the eastern two-thirds was still slavery. So when Haitians reunite the island as it had been in its indigenous state, they bring abolition to the eastern side of the island. And so the argument doesn't really hold water, because the eastern side of the island since 1795, so from 1795 to 1809, was under French rule. So those same French planters are there. They're bequeathing their same brutal methods to those who are going to come after them, namely Dominican elite, and their racism. And their racism is what has really stayed and caused them to separate from Haiti. And that left the western third of the island actually really saddled more with that debt. So I think any analysis of the different ways, fates of the two parts of that island that doesn't take into account the indemnity, doesn't take into account what the United States is trying to do with establishing a port in Mont Saint Nicolas in Haiti as a naval base. We have to take all of this into account, because they are not ruling in an isolated sort of petri dish of an experiment. Like, people are pouring stuff in there all the time, and who knows, and they don't know what's going to happen, and it's like little bacteria grow everywhere and they go off in their own directions, even in worse directions than probably the people who created this scenario even imagined when they were doing the tampering.
There's so many different angles that we can approach with this story. So I'm glad we got a chance to touch on that one, and thank you for clarifying that. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to sort of three themes of questions. So uh, one is the role of women in the Haitian Revolution. One is sort of validating information on the king's birth. And then the last is looking at a little bit closer look at the artwork, that some of the artwork that you've brought up. So I'm going to start with women. We're going to go to Eric's question. I wonder if there's more to say about the role of women. I know the Haitian revolutionaries read and cite the radical literature coming out of France, but does any of the discourse on feminism and women's rights carry over into Haiti? And is there discussion or debate about women's rights as Haiti drafts its new constitutions?
Yes, so women are extremely important to the Haitian Revolution. They are all over the sources as fighters. So we know that Marie-Jeanne Lamartinière wore men's clothing and fought alongside her husband. We know that Sanit Belair was executed with her husband Charles Belair, the nephew of Toussaint Louverture. We also know that Dessalines' wife, Marie-Claire Heureuse, that she and Toussaint Louverture's wife, Suzanne Louverture, traveled alongside their husbands with them. There are also sources, people who spent time in the Kingdom of Haiti, who say that Marie-Louise frequently traveled with Christophe during the Revolution with her first child, Francois Ferdinand, on her back. We also know that women carried ammunition, food, that sometimes they acted as decoys. They would, be talking to the French soldiers and seem like they're very, innocent and gathering water or food. And they would find out information where the French soldiers were going, and they would tell the Haitian revolutionaries. They would give them that information. And we know this because the French sources, start to say, the French captains and generals say, don't trust the women. They might be trying to trick you. And so a lot of that got glossed over because it's laden with a ton of racism and overtly like sexualizing and demonizing these women, calling them all voodoo priestesses. And of course, from the French standpoint, this is something to be demonized. They're afraid of these women and they might put a spell on you. But if we read it from another register, we see that women were considered powerful actors in the revolution and that they were feared because it was known that they could actually do something that could harm the French military. On another side of that is when the Haitian states are formed. So in the Empire of Haiti, one of the noticeable things is that women only come into the Imperial Constitution of Haiti as white women. So everyone else is just kind of a citizen and without any distinction. And citizens were always coded as male, right? So we can read into that or we cannot read into that. But when women are specifically named, it's, oh, white women who have married Haitian men can become Haitian. So it's sort of like this what method of citizenship for the white women who've remained in the former colony, the now independent country, and that they can become Haitians. And I think the absence of Haitian women from the newspaper standpoint kind of speaks to how the society was going to develop to be like the other societies around it, a kind of patriarchal and male dominated society. But it's very clear that earlier that wasn't necessarily inevitable. And Christophe was taking steps to maybe mitigate that. At the time of his death, he was recruiting female school teachers from Great Britain to come into the kingdom because they believed, of course, that women or girls should only be taught by women, not by male instructors. So that was a project of his that he wrote frequently about to the British abolitionists William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson. So there was a little grain of like maybe making steps to create more gender equality, but they didn't get there for a really, really long time.
More untold stories for your future books. I do want to go to David and Camille asked very early on in the presentation um, about the king's birthplace and birth date. And David says, "How certain are we of these facts?" And I'm sorry for my ignorance, but African Americans have so much trouble sort of pinning down that information during the era of slavery. How accurate do we think that those histories actually are? And Camille, who has already read your book, says you present a few different potential birth dates and origin theories of Christophe. And do you think any of those stories are credible, or was what you presented in this talk by far the most convincing for you?
Yes, I mean, these are great questions. And so it helps to understand that the documents I presented, those are documents from Christophe's own kingdom that he commissioned, that he would have read, and that ostensibly he provided the information. And that's why I give them such great importance. But in the book, I also do talk about other people who knew him, who confirmed his birth on the island of Grenada and talked about his participation in the Battle of Savannah. And I found that what I was initially looking for was what every historian wants, which is a birth certificate or a baptismal certificate in their case. But what I realized was, as the first questioner asked, is similar to the case of African Americans. You're not going to have that because if you're enslaved, you're not going to be baptized and you're not going to have a record of your birth. And so, what Christophe did when he creates this almanac that again tells not just his history, but his family's history and every single person who's in his nobility and in his military, is to create the records that the French never created, is to leave that legacy behind. And so, for me as a researcher, to discount that is to discount kind of his entire project, which is why are they writing so much history? Why are they cataloging everything with such precision? Why does Christophe keep copies, multiple copies of every single letter he writes? Because he knows, he has a keen understanding of what will happen. And in the book, I explain in further detail how he had experienced misinformation about things he had done during French rule that landed him in jail when it was a colony on two separate occasions. So he understands the importance of documents. And one of the documents he laments having lost is his what they call the Journal de Campagne, which is like his campaign journal from when he fought at the Battle of Vertières. This is how important it was for him to keep documents and catalog. And so when he says, I'm born in Grenada. My birthday is October 6th, 1767, fought in the Battle of Savannah, through, again, the almanacs, through Vate's works. I'm going to go with that because I think that is the respectful, ethical, and also the more historically accurate thing to do.
Yeah, and just so interesting that you've studied the archive enough to sort of gather a sense of his character and how he thinks, right? And to be able to make these kinds of judgment calls based on your understanding of his mindset. So I want to go to Ruth, Camille, and Aaliyah, who are all asking about art. So I'm going to give you all three at once, and you can take it in the direction you want to go. So I'm going to go from the more general to the more specific. Camille says many of the sources that you presented are from Puerto Rico. Is there a museum or a library there where we can view some of the artwork or see some of the documents? Aaliyah says, I really appreciated your focus on the power of representation. I have to agree with Aaliyah. I was thinking as I was looking at those pictures, what if Henri Christophe had access to AI generated images? What would he have done with how he's represented? And so Aaliyah wants to know, would it be possible to expand more on his support of the arts? And then Ruth says the painting on the building of the citadel echoes the building of the biblical Tower of Babel, the feeling of this never-ending, all-encompassing building activity which consumes the lives of the people who are enslaved in this project. I wonder if the artist is commenting on the grandiose dreams of the Nimrod that Christophe fancies himself to be.
Yeah, I'll tackle the last question first. And I say I think that the artist is probably playing with all of that. I mean, it gives you a scale in its particularity to the kingdom. But yeah, I think that's absolutely right that it's not that different from other attempts at trying to portray, for example, how the pyramids were built. When you look at how artists have portrayed this, and in fact, the St. Lucian writer and painter Derek Walcott compared Christophe, I think wrongly, to a pharaoh in terms of the building of his citadel. And I think it doesn't quite capture the sort of complexity and pressures that Christophe was under. He didn't have like this sort of unfettered rule because of the world he lived in. Um, on the sources from Puerto Rico, I had the immense pleasure of visiting the Nemours archive. Alfred Nemours was a Haitian historian in the 20th century. And when he died in France, he donated, his wife, his widow, donated his entire archive to the University of Puerto Rico. The side note is because the French government did not want these items. They said it did not have anything to do with them, even though in his archive he had letters from Louverture to Napoleon, various French officials, the autopsy of Louverture, who died in France, free and French, and that the French Republic today is trying to recuperate as French. He's got an image in the Panthéon, for example, in Paris. So it's very interesting how things change. But at this moment, when Nemours dies, the French don't want to have anything to do with this. And so the widow donates these materials to the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras, that campus. It is available by appointment, but I have to say that Christophe portrait, and there's one I didn't show you of his son done by the same artist, are traveling all around. So if you can catch them in an exhibit in a city near you, that would be the best way to see those two paintings. The documents, you can visit that archive by appointment. And also you can visit my website, lagazetteroyale.com, where I've digitized some of them. As for the power of representation, I love this question also because I think that it's very, very important in light of how Black people were usually portrayed in this era, where they did not get to be stately and finely dressed and portrayed as dignified, respectable people. They were portrayed as on their knees, as in that engraving I showed you that was depicting, when I had the slide up about Jean-Pierre Boyer and the indemnity, it was depicting the French King Charles X kneeling before an enslaved Black man and breaking his chains like Charles X is some big liberator, even though this is 1825 and slavery, as I mentioned, persists in the other French colonies until 1848. So he's not some, anti-racist liberator. But this was also an image that abolitionists often used. There's a famous engraving that where a man in chains like looks up and he's like, am I not a man and a brother? And then there's one of a woman saying, am I not a mother and a sister? And, all of these things. And even though those were attempts to get slavery abolished, Christophe is saying, here we are, a free and Black and independent state. And here we can portray ourselves, because all of those images did come from white abolitionists who were using them, yes, for a noble purpose, but nonetheless showed a kind of degraded and dehumanized condition. And I think Christophe is deliberately saying, not only do I not want to be demonized as an individual, like this is important for all of humanity, by which they meant Black humanity, because he makes that point. He says the interest of Haiti is the interest of all of humanity. If you want the triumph of humankind, then you are interested in the success and prosperity of the Haitian people.
I don't think there's any better note to end on than that one. I think any more words would just muddy the beauty of the journey you've taken us on this afternoon. Thank you so much, Professor Daut. This has been phenomenal. I know that this video will be watched and rewatched and shared with friends and family. And when you have a chance to read the comments in the chat, you will see the many enthusiastic remarks for people being enlightened by this little known bit of history of the Caribbean and arguably American history and world history, right? So thank you so much. Really appreciate getting to spend this quality time with you. The book is available for purchase on the link, and many of you have said you've already bought it, so it might be sold out. I don't know. Get your copy before it's too late. The Life and Times of Haiti's First, Last, and Only King, Henry Christophe, and our Professor Marlene Daut. We hope to have you back again. We hope to give people an opportunity to travel with you to the Caribbean one day. And we thank you for your time and generosity of your scholarship today.
Thank you so much, everyone, truly, for spending this afternoon and evening. And thank you for this kind invitation and all your generous questions and contextualization, Lauren. I'm just so delighted and honored to have been here and to spend this time with all of you.
Wonderful. All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.